Welcome to the Killer Innovation Show, the longest continuously produced podcast in history. Each week, Phil McKinney brings you the insights and strategies to amplify your creativity and innovation skills. Here's your host, Phil McKinney.
Hello and welcome. I'm Phil McKinney. This week, we are reaching deep into the archive and bringing you one of our most downloaded shows. Enjoy. I am really pleased to have a special guest here today joining us here in the studio. This individual is one of the individuals in Silicon Valley that other CEOs look up to, simply from the standpoint of pure endurance. Raisin, he's not only a CEO, but he was an inventor, an entrepreneur, started his company. He's now an investor, an angel investor. He's a best-selling author. And he is the longest serving CEO of a publicly traded company in Silicon Valley. Ray, thanks for joining us here at Killer Innovations.
Well, Bill, so good to be with you today.
Hey, great. Thanks for being here. Hey, Ray, let's talk a little bit about the fact that you were the longest serving CEO of a publicly traded company in Silicon Valley. We hear all the stories about CEOs not lasting and the startup CEOs not being the ones that actually take it public. So why don't you take us back to the time when you actually started your company? Give us a little context here.
Oh, it's an interesting story. I had, this is back in 1974. That's back before many of your listeners were even born, probably, or at least out of college. But I had invented a piece of equipment called the wafer stepper for the semiconductor industry. It's a photolithographic imager that creates the image on the silicon wafer. And it was way before its time. In other words, it was we were on small wafers and we were not requiring very small geometries. And so it was a big undertaking for our company that I was working for. And my boss really didn't want to do it, but I had got us tied into TI, Texas Instruments, and he wanted them as a customer. But the project was absolutely astronomical as far as an undertaking. And so he took me to lunch one day and said, you really don't fit into a corporate environment. You really should be out on your own. And suggested I don't work for anybody, that I only work for myself, as you would, or start my own company. So I hopped, this is in Woodland Hills. I took the plane from Burbank back to the Bay Area, and remember pulling in the garage, walked upstairs, and my wife met me as she normally does, throws her arms around me and welcomes me home. And I said, I'm not going to work for anybody ever again. And I kind of stomped my foot, and she said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know, but I'm not going to work for anybody. And so that preceded me to start thinking about what do I want to do? What kind of business do I want to be in? And, I thought, well, maybe consumer electronics. I tried that for a little bit and then hit upon the idea of starting my own semiconductor company. So I had a friend who was really a genius, a super engineer. And I started talking to him about ideas about companies, and neither one of us wanted to go for venture money. So wait a minute, who can start a semiconductor company without venture money? And I said, well, we'll have to come up with a new strategy. So basically, we went to the bank and conned them into loaning us $300,000. Then we put up $300,000. We had $600,000. We bought a major piece of test equipment and began doing test services for semiconductor companies. In '85, we started Micrel in '78. Again, no venture money, just our own money. The bank required us to be profitable from day one, and so I got the bank to at least give me 1 quarter that I could lose money, so I could be, at least profitable 3 out of 4. But I couldn't lose money for the whole year. In other words, my loss in 1 quarter could not erase the whole year, because the banks want you to be able to make your debt service. So that was a challenge to form a semiconductor company that was profitable from day one. And that required a different mindset, different philosophy as to how you would run and start a company. And that was a real trying experience because, again, I'd never run a company before. And so here I am in the thick of the thin of things, as you say, trying to be a profitable semiconductor company. And we started out selling services, test services, reliability, quality type testing. And so that's how we started the company. And then in 85, we had enough money. We could hire a group of engineers, and I hired a bunch out of National Semiconductor, and we started designing our own products. We sat around a table one day, I remember this distinctly, and we said, what kind of products are we going to design? And so we looked around each other, and nobody had any idea. And so one of my VPs said, well, how about analog products? I said, what's an analog product? And so we started talking about what kind of products we could build. And so we, first of all, what's interesting, Bill, is we didn't start a company with a bunch of products. We started a company to build a company, to actually have an infrastructure of a real, honest to goodness, profitable running company before we even designed our first product. So that's what we did. So we started with a good little, what we call a low dropout regulator was our first product. And it was quite successful. And then we started building other products, and we became well known as a power management, analog power management supplier, and got selected by Samsung and their first and Qualcomm on their first cell phones, and it was just just a great ride for us. Had timing was right. We had great products. We decided to go into the power management side of the analog business, and got the company. We had about a couple thousand products when we went public in 1994, and went public on the NASDAQ Stock Exchange, and we were profitable every single year up until 2003, I guess. 2002. We closed down one fab because we just didn't, as you know, the Y2K problem with overcapacity, and so we lost half our customer base, by the way, in 2001, and we had to rebuild our whole company again. But we were still profitable. And in 2003, when we had to close down that fab, I still only lost $50,000 total, including writing off $30 million and shutting a fab down.
And you couldn't find the 50,000.
Bill, we tried. I mean, I did everything I could not to lose money, but it was so close. But you don't know your numbers until it's till the end, right?
Right, exactly.
And so, I thought I swear to you, I thought I had a 95% chance of being profitable even that year. But when the numbers were all rolled up, we still lost $50,000. So my record was broken. However, the following year we were profitable again. So I only lost money 1 year out of 37.
Well, and that's interesting, Ray, because I've done 2 rounds in the Valley. You've been in the Valley, for a lot longer than I've ever been in the Valley, and it's particularly in the silicon industry, it can be very cyclical, right? Depending on transitions to new technologies, new products coming to market, new companies emerging, companies going out, entire segments going away. And if you think about it, if I recall the global, silicon market, there's been, a half a dozen, 8, 9 different major downturns in the chip market. Yet, Micrel's been able to survive all of them, and very few semiconductor companies were ever able to survive all 8 of those downturns. And so, Ray, we were talking a little bit about the fact that you were able to, as a CEO, lead your company through the cycles of innovation, and that those cycles of innovations in some cases actually lead to downturns. how do you do that? Because there's just so few companies that could survive one or two downturns. And what, you had 8 or 9 major ones in your industry.
That's correct. Well, that's a very good point because I started in the semiconductor industry in 1963, so that probably makes me the longest surviving member of the semiconductor industry worldwide, even. And so I learned. I'm an innovator and an entrepreneur, and I learned these cycles. I learned how they operate, and so I could forecast the cycle before it actually happens. And that's very key as an innovator and entrepreneur, is to know your cycles and know how these cycles affect your company.
How do you predict those cycles, though? Was there like a weak signal, something changing in how your customers were buying, debt increasing? What was it that kind of gave you, your spidey senses that said, hey, something's different?
Okay, so your customers are your best lead on that, and so in May of 1999, I think it was, actually maybe February in that time frame, I could see a ramp up that I'd not seen before in our industry. That was leading up to this Y2K issue, and the customers were ordering, double ordering, triple ordering, and at a rate that I didn't think was sustainable. And so I predicted, as I was at a trying to remember the conference, I think it was a Morgan Stanley conference. I saw the ramp up was too excessive. In other words, we're going to have more inventory than there could be consumed. And so I came out, predicted the downturn that actually took place beginning in September of 1999. That led actually to the crash in 2001. And even though I was affected by it, at least we were prepared for it because we could see it 6 to 9 months ahead of our competitors, or others could see it. And so we began to prepare for it. In other words, we scale back our inventory, which upset some of our investors because they couldn't see our competitor were ramping and we were scaling back. So when the bottom fell out, at least we weren't isn't that bad a shape. So I think the key to surviving these cycles is understanding them, and that's not an easy task. I mean, we can talk about it, you and I, and make it sound simple, but it's not simple. If you know that a product life cycle is roughly 5 years, okay, that's what we call. So if you look at a product, we talk about internet, or we talk about the Internet of Things, or automotive, or whatever the cycle we're in. We have to understand that cycle doesn't last forever. It lasts maybe 5 years. And so if you're designing for that cycle and you're late in that cycle, you're going to miss it. Mm-hmm. So, you want to anticipate what is going to be the next winning product, whether you learn that at CES, or whether you're out there polling your customers, or however you're doing it. You need to find out where you fit, and then make sure your product life cycle enters at the early stage, not the late stage. So that means you'd have to be at least 2 to 3 years ahead of when that cycle actually starts, because it takes you a year and a half to design it, takes you another year and a half to get you into production. So, if you're 3 years into the cycle before you even get your product out, you only got a couple of years left and you're done.
Yep. Well, it's actually quite funny, right? We've had a number of guests on the show, right? And they talk about particularly app developers, right? They're 6 months to launch, right? I keep reminding people, hardware is hard. It's like at HP, you want to launch a new server, you want to launch a new laptop, you're 2 years out, 2.5, 3 years out before, you come up with something fundamentally new, and you've got to be ahead of the curve. And how do you predict what a consumer or what a marketplace is going to emerge, 3 years from now? So what were the key inputs for you to how do you stay ahead of knowing when those shifts were going to happen? Analysts? Was it just you out there talking to customers? What was it?
Well, not so much the analysts. What I learned was your customers are, if you get into their design cycle, if you're a player, in Intel they call it the yellow book. If you're allowed in the front door, as you would in the yellow book stage or in the early stage, then you can see what kind of products they're going to need, because they start telling you what their next product is.
Right.
And depending upon what market you're going into, you have to be with that key player, whether it be an Intel or an HP or an IBM or whoever it is or Cisco or whoever you're gonna partner with. But your partner is the one that's going to help you.
Right.
And they're expecting something in return.
Right.
So,
and it is the issue of not being in the vacuum, right? Because in your case, one person or one company trying to completely discern that on themselves versus taking it's basically what happened in the 70s and 80s in Silicon Valley. And today they refer to it as knowledge of the crowd, right? Mm-hmm. In this case, the knowledge of the crowd is you as a supplier, your customer thinking about what they're going to deliver next, and everybody lining up to deliver and contribute their expertise and contribute their knowledge on that. And I love this title. I'm sorry, Ray, I keep repeating it. The longest serving CEO of a publicly traded company in Silicon Valley. You are an endangered species, given the average tenure of a CEO of a Silicon Valley company, or more likely, the tenure of a Silicon Valley company by itself these days. We were talking during off on the commercial break around this whole drive in the valley towards innovation through M&A versus really innovating within companies. But I want to get back, though, really quickly to the topic we wrapped up in segment 2 on, which was around, you've got just a phenomenal amount of experience, given your roles and watching all the transitions happening in the valley over that length of time. If you could take all of your experience now and rewind it and wish somebody had told you when you first started, what advice would you wish you had known at the beginning?
Well, that would get us detracted to some degree. One was to be careful about your board.
Yes.
Yeah,
actually, Ray and I were talking about on the commercial break before about our opinions of some of the dysfunctionality that it's occurring on more and more boards these days.
Well, I would definitely make sure that I had a board that was a viable, a helpful, and a contributable board, not just a board that's going to sit around and pick you to pieces and argue with you as opposed to helping you. So if starting over again, I would definitely be more careful about my board selection. I wouldn't care one what the investors wanted or what the shareholders wanted. It's what I think is best for the company, the kind of board that I think will be supportive and sustainable over the long haul. And I know shareholders don't like that. They like to have more independency, but I'll tell you, independent board directors are a pain. And because they think they're independent, they are independent. They're too independent of you, independent of what you want and what your company needs. So, Bill, that's what I just, I would say that my biggest mistake was not being more selective on my board.
Yeah, and I mean, and you can look at a lot of the boards, right? I just shake my head. I don't get what happened at Theranos as an example, right? And you look at the big names, right? There's a lot of boards out there that are going for big name boards, right? And you got Henry Kissinger and Charles Schultz on your board, right? You got all these names. But there was no value add other than lending you credibility of a name of a board member. They're not helpful.
Exactly.
And
that was my point. My point, I mean, forget about the name brand board directors. Just get board members who are helpful, who understand where you are, what you're going to do. Make sure they've got the right mix. Make sure there's synergy between where you're headed as your company and that your board sustains and accepts that.
That's great advice. Hey, let's talk a little bit about, I know you have your own kind of, on the show here, we call it pay it forward, kind of a give back activity around what you're calling, Zen Starter, which is really Shark Tanks for universities. Share with us what that program is and why you're doing it.
Okay. So, almost every university, I think in this country, and maybe even outside this country, has an entrepreneur program. It's the hot thing. When I got my master's in '68, nobody thought about starting companies in those days, and so it was a thing that I missed was that learning about how to run a company as a student. And so I thought, well, with my experience at serving longer than most CEOs ever serve, why not share that with these kids, these students? Because 9 out of 10 companies failed before the third year. And so, how do I get that ratio down to 50% anyway? Cut it down so that we don't have so many companies don't fail. And so I came up with the idea of Zen Starter, and I help fund. It's a give back thing. I don't take any ownership. I just put seed money in. They form a little board, a student board, and the students then working as a team go to their student board and they present their business case, their business plan, and see if the board will award them some seed money, like a Kickstarter, to start their little business while they're still a student. So Zen Starter only applies to students that are fully enrolled at their universities or colleges. They can't be part-time. They can't leave the school and come back. You've got to be a student. And so this is a study thing. It's part of the entrepreneur program at most universities that we're currently with. I think we're with 5 or 6. And so we help them set up the program. They use Tough Things First as their textbook, and then they have faculty members that help mentor them, and then they go and get outside mentors, alumni of that school, and then these alumni get excited and they want to invest in Zen Starter, and man, it's taken off like crazy. So what started out to be just 2.5 years ago with just a few hundred students, now is over 5,000 students that are involved in the Zen Starter program. And it's just really, it's really taken off. I don't want to think I'm some kind of genius. It was some bright idea. It was just wanting to help. I just thought, what's causing so many of these little companies to fail? And the reason is, Phil, the reason these companies don't last is because they don't start a company. They have a product idea. And in fact, I met with a couple of guys just 4 days ago, and they wanted me to invest in their company. There's 2 or 3 guys who've been at this product for 8 years, and so they decided that they'd like to form a board. And I said, "You're too small to form a board. You're not even a company." "What do you mean we're not a company?" I said, "Well, tell me what your company goal is. What is the mission of your company?" "Well, we just want to get this product out." "Well, that's not a company." Getting a product out is not a company. Yeah,
you and I were talking again at the commercial break. We had a lot of great conversations during commercial breaks. We should start not doing commercials and just sharing. But you and I were sharing about the challenges of people don't build companies to last.
Exactly.
It's a build to flip or build to M&A or hope you get bought by Google. Right, exactly. These days.
And that's really the truth of it, Phil. I mean, the problem we have is that these companies, these entrepreneurs aren't thinking about forming a company.
Mm-hmm.
They're thinking about getting out. They're already getting out before they get in.
Yep.
That's called the out-in bunch.
Exactly. And you mentioned your book, Tough Things First. It's published by McGraw-Hill. We'll have a link to that in the show notes. So check that out. We'll have a link. And Tough Things First is actually used by a number of universities. It's part of a textbooks, right? Talking about, really, what does it really take? And it covers really, if you want to know more about Ray's 40 years at the helm of his company and the whole Silicon Valley success piece, great book. You should definitely check it out. Hey, Ray, if people want to keep up with what you are doing, where's the best place that they can track what you're doing? Is there a website? Is there?
Yeah, there is, Phil. It's called toughthingsfirst.com.
Okay.
So it's the same name of the book, but .com. So it's toughthingsfirst.com. And if they go there, they can hear our podcast. We produce one podcast a week. I also produce a musing or a tip for entrepreneurs. I produce those once to twice a day. So I'm doing 5 to 10 a week. And so they can get some tips and ideas on how to run companies, start companies, just how to manage employees, how to manage your board, how to select boards. I mean, we cover the whole gamut of being an entrepreneur. Even people who have been running companies for years and years that think they know everything can learn a lot from Tough Things First.
Perfect. We're going to wrap up the show. And Ray, again, thanks for taking the time joining us. And I really have enjoyed the conversation. It was good to reminisce. And thanks a lot again for joining. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks, Bill.
With that, we're going to wrap up today's show. Check out the show notes over at killerinnovations.com. Love to hear from you. Drop me a note, phil@killerinnovations.com, or hop over to the innovators.community. That's where I hang out. Love to chat with you. Talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Podcasting nonstop since 2005, this has been the Killer Innovation Show on the Innovators Network.